Liz Hanks is a distinguished cellist, composer, collaborator, thriving in the vibrant cultural scene of Sheffield, England. Her musical journey is characterized by a deep engagement with an eclectic mix of musical traditions, notably including folk and Indian classical style music. This rich blend of influence is evident in her collaborations with artists such as Martin Simpson, James, Richard Hawley, and more, and the organization South Asian Arts UK. These partnerships reflect her commitment to exploring the confluence of diverse musical heritages. Liz is channeling her vast experiences and influences into her debut solo album, which we will get into, an endeavor supported by Help Musicians UK. This body of work is a reflection of her core musical inspirations: minimalism, folk, Indian classical music, and improv. Such a fusion not only highlights her versatility, but also her ability to create something uniquely resonant. The album is anticipated to be a very strong contribution to the contemporary music, showcasing her ability to interweave different sonic textures. Liz Hanks is not just creating music, she is using her art to advocate for the preservation and appreciation of our natural world. So, do the opposite right now of playing a cello. Sit your back slouched on a nice chair. Imagine being on a relaxing beach. Loosen your stomach muscles and appreciate every pluck of the spoken word. Let's welcome Liz Hanks to Surprise Cast. Hi, Liz. How are you?
Hi, William. I'm really good, thank you.
Very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, and thank you for that lovely intro as well.
You're quite welcome. Can you tell the listeners where you are podcasting from?
Yes, I'm at home here in Sheffield, in England, and yeah, it's actually quite good weather now here. It's improved.
I've never been to Sheffield, England. I've read about it. I've seen images and video, and images that get conjured up are pretty gray and dreary.
I know that does seem to be the image that Sheffield seems to give the world, but actually it's a very beautiful place. We're really lucky because it's so hilly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of areas that don't have housing on, haven't been built on, because they're not suitable for building on. So they're mostly covered in trees. So when you look across the city at this time of year, it's pretty green, actually. It's very beautiful.
Perhaps maybe the Hawley Meadows.
Hollow Meadows, that's out in the Peak District. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we have some of that too. There's, definitely over the winter months. It's got a bit of both. And I guess, you see the light and the dark of life in that way, don't you? You have that, you feel really happy when the green happens again. And yeah.
Well, welcome. And I look forward to learning about you as a musician, but most importantly, a human being. Well, let's get started. I'm going to let our listeners know that our conversation is going to be broken up into 3 pillars, 3 parts. And this is loosely based from the work that Arthur C. Brooks did. He wrote a book called Build the Life You Want, The Art and Science of Getting Happier. So we're going to touch on these 3 pillars: family, friendship, and your work. And we'll have a little bit of fun at the end. So let's get started. I'm going to read to you a passage from an author by the name of Twyla Tharp. The book is called The Creative Habit. Learn it and use it for life. Take a listen, and then I'm going to ask you a question. On Saturday, September 8th, 2001, my company gave a free performance for 2,000 people in the plaza that separated the Twin Towers of New York, World Trade Center. We were the last people to perform there. 3 days later, the day of the attacks, I was putting the finishing touches on a theatrical project to which I had devoted most of my year, preparing for a rehearsal in the late morning at a studio in Midtown Manhattan. As the chaos of 9/11 developed, I thought about working with my dancers that day, but decided it was impossible for many reasons. I phoned all the dancers to check on their welfare, and I told them there was no obligation to attend rehearsal the next day. Yet, they all showed up, ready to work, arriving in a shaken Manhattan, with its bridges and tunnels only just reopened from Brooklyn to Westchester County to the north. We could have easily become absorbed by the tragedy, lost in it, and paralyzed by it. But what came back to us was the instinct to dance. I began as a dancer, and in those days of pain and shock, I went back to where I started. Creating dance is the thing I know best. It is how I recognize myself, even in the worst of times. So here's my question, Liz. As part of your identity as a cellist, what is it?
Oh, it's a very good question. So what is it that makes me do it? It's really interesting because it's maybe something you're about to ask me next, but I started playing. I was one of those lucky people that when I was at school, lessons were free, and a teacher just came in and just said, "Would anyone like to play this instrument?" And that is pretty much the only reason I'm playing, because my parents don't play music. So it was a real turning point in my life. And I think for some reason it just struck a chord, and I just stuck with it, and when you're a kid, there's, it's kind of mixed, isn't it? You kind of feel mixed about what you're doing and why you're doing it. But for some reason, there was something there that just made me carry on doing it. And when I sort of skip forward to maybe now, I've had periods in my life when I didn't play. For instance, when I had my first child, and I suddenly realised that I didn't feel whole anymore. So it's funny how playing an instrument can sometimes, it becomes a big part of you. And I know that I couldn't not do it. So it's a terrifying thought that if ever I couldn't. But the reason why, I guess, is to give. I think it's to give to people. And I think I really discovered this from the pandemic. I don't think I really realised how important it was until we couldn't do it anymore. And then how amazing it was when we went back to doing it. And to be quite honest, before the pandemic, I think I sometimes felt a bit selfish for being a musician. I felt like I was just very lucky to be doing something so wonderful. And I don't think I really realised how important it was to other people until it was all gone, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. You mentioned the word whole. You didn't feel whole. But what is whole to you?
I guess in terms of being a musician, I guess whole is having that creativity and that kind of way of kind of giving my music to people, or just playing with others and creating something that can, have an effect on people. Basically, that's it, I guess, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm going to be curious and paying close attention to your words as we soldier forward in terms of being quarterly filled with satisfaction, half filled, entirely filled, and how that manifests within the work that you do. So let's keep an ear out for that.
Okay.
I love that. Do. I'm going to read to you a really quick passage from a book called Good Grief, Peanuts Pick-Me-Ups. And these are little nuggets along the way that can help us just gain a little bit of perspective. Charlie Brown is watching television. His curious sister, Sally, walks in and she says, "Has school started yet?" "Good grief, no. It doesn't start until September." Sally says, "Well, I don't want to be late the first day." Charlie Brown says, "Well, don't worry. It doesn't start for 11 weeks. Sally says, "Maybe I'd better take my coat off." So my question to you, Liz, is What was your school experience like growing up?
Okay, so I was very lucky actually. I grew up in a tiny village in Northamptonshire with a very tiny school. I think it eventually closed because there's only about 10 people left. So started in a very small school. But even there was music there actually. I remember very clearly playing recorder there and really enjoying it and singing. And so I was lucky there. Then I moved to the local town to a primary school, which again had music. It just shows how important it is, because that was where I began playing the cello and was given lots of opportunities. We did like musicals and all kinds of things. And I was just really lucky to have that. And my teacher, Mr. Tom, who I actually saw only a couple of months ago for the first time in years and years. I invited him to a show and it was just so amazing to see him. I'll get back onto him later. But so I had a wonderful time at primary school. And then in this small town, I went to the secondary. There was only choice of one school. And again, incredibly lucky. We had choirs, we had orchestras, we had jazz bands, which I played in, and we had everything. We were just so lucky. And then as well as that, in the UK, we have these things called music hubs. And then back then it was like sort of music schools, it was called. And it's like a Saturday morning music school. So every week I'd go and play in a proper symphony orchestra, which is just the most amazing training for a kid, and the experiences you have. And for someone who came from a non-musical family, it just opened up so many doors and gave me opportunities that I'd have never have dreamt of. You know, we ended up playing at the Albert Hall and things like that. It's just amazing. Yeah, I know. And it's incredible when you look back that you're doing things like that. And it's so much support from teachers when I think how much effort they put in and all the trips they took us on, and incredible.
You, I believe, are the second artist that has come from that small village. James Chapman from the band Maps also comes from Northamptonshire.
From the county of Northamptonshire. Very good.
Sounds like there's some good water flowing through there.
Amazing.
In terms of schooling and your childhood experiences, I've spoken to many artists, musicians where they struggled through school. They couldn't sit still. They were bullied. They felt weird. They felt like a fish out of water. They dealt with divorced parents. They had some very severe hardships that still affects them today, and it shows up in their work in some fashion. So what I want to know from you, Liz, if you don't mind sharing with our listeners, what hardships did you encounter in your childhood that you still carry a little bit of that in your suitcase?
That's really interesting. Well, to be honest, I was just really lucky, and I don't think I have a list like that to give you. I had a very, happy childhood, happy schooling, and actually my schools, I never felt like the odd one out. I never felt like, everyone was just kind of proud of what you did, and that's pretty amazing looking back actually that, this kid with a cello on the back never got, everyone just accepted that was a thing. And it was just a normal comprehensive, and I was just lucky. It was okay to do that. There is one thing, I guess, that does always stay with me, but I don't think it's a negative thing anymore. And that is the fact that I come from a non-musical family. So many people, have all this incredible history in their family of their parents and their grandparents, and they grew up playing, and, that didn't happen in my family. But I think sometimes it makes you feel like, pretty strong imposter syndrome. But I kind of turn that around and just I just have to laugh at situations and just think, what am I doing here? This is brilliant. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I just think, just enjoy it, It's okay. Everyone gets to a point in their life at different times, and if something does happen, I just think, wow, this is amazing. How did I get here? I just enjoy it now, and I don't worry about those imposter syndrome feelings anymore.
Wow. And I've heard that word used time and time again in interviews often. And it's pretty remarkable. Fabulous. I applaud that wonderful childhood experience. And how do you think, real quickly, it does show up in your work?
Yeah, that positivity. I think that it shows up in a lot of my kind of way I work and way I've worked in the past, in the fact that things weren't handed to me on a plate in a lot of ways. So I've been very proactive, which I'm sure I'll tell you more about later, on sort of making things happen. If I feel like things aren't really happening the way I want them to go, then I'm pretty good at making something happen, which I'll give you an example. So, for instance, when I left university, so this is how I ended up in Sheffield. I went to university in Sheffield, and, this was all classical music up until this point. I hadn't played any other style until my last year at university. And I left university thinking, what am I going to do? I didn't really want to play in an orchestra, and I wasn't really good enough to play in an orchestra at that point, to be honest. So I thought, I really want to play cello for a living. So I decided to just actually, this is very late 90s, I wrote letters to all the local studios and just said, hi, I'm a cellist. I've just graduated. If you ever need a cellist for a session, then please get in touch. And so I just, thought, okay, I'll just send them all a letter. And then the next thing I knew, I actually got a phone call, and that was my first proper session. And that was for the Long Pigs, which is how I met Richard Hawley, of course. So yeah, so it all, and isn't it amazing how one little action like that can set off a whole chain of events? So it's definitely a bit of both.
That is brilliant. Now I'm going to put you on the spot here. Because of that action, there was a reaction, there was a response. Do you still feel compelled to create that action? Or is it now people are coming to you?
Yeah, so I'm still, especially as I have my own project, I have my own album, I'm still sort of being proactive with that and making sure I kind of contact people about sort of live shows and sort of next stages. But then equally, I'm getting a lot of people contact me about everything. So yeah, it's still a bit of both, I guess. But I guess I have to do less of that now, which is a nice situation to be in, I guess.
Tell the listeners about this discovery of the cello and what it does to your body, your senses.
That's interesting. I think for me, it's probably something I more discovered in my mid-20s, where I really started studying properly. I was a pretty good cellist when I left university, but I always felt I could do better. And I just had something in me saying, I think you're not there yet. You've got, and I've still believe this now, always trying harder. And I had a teacher then, it was Bernard Gregor Smith, who was the cellist in the Lindsay String Quartet. And he just taught me so much. And I just felt like this was my time to learn. And I remember just watching him, and he's an incredible cellist. When you see him play, he just has such an amazing, relaxed body. Like, it's incredible how heavy he can make his body. And you can just see how little effort he has to put in to make this incredible sound come out. And I guess I learned from him just by watching a lot and really observing. And now, for me, the physicality of playing, it's very interesting. It's, on a good day, it's very kind of grounding. And so when I play, I suddenly feel like, I guess it's like doing yoga or something. Suddenly my body just goes like that. And if I'm ever nervous about a performance, I know I'm okay once I start, because I'm so trained in myself just to suddenly, play and sync and feel better. So there's that, but it's also, there's something beautiful about the physicality of playing. It feels a little bit like dancing when it's all working, that you just, it all just moves at the right time. And it does feel it's a lovely feeling. Can't explain it. Yeah, there's something lovely about the bow arm, the way it looks like you've got a grip in your hand and you're not. It's completely relaxed, enough to obviously hold it up. If you just hold up a pencil or a pen and hold it to the point before you're about to drop it, that's basically what it feels like to hold a bow. But it's then transferring all this weight from your arm into it. It basically feels like you're kind of floating or sort of flying. It's quite hard to describe when it's working.
All right, then I got to ask you this.
Yeah.
Okay. The anatomy of a cello. I had the incredible pleasure of seeing Jose Gonzalez with the String Theory Band in Los Angeles. And I thought it was just going to be Jose Gonzalez and his guitar. Well, I get there and he's got this enormous orchestra behind him with phenomenal instruments. Some I had actually no idea what they were. And then he had some cellists on there. And I was thinking, if I played the cello, what aspect to the cello would I just gravitate towards? So I'm going to ask you this. Is it the body, the entire body? Is it the fingerboard? What? Is it the actual strings? What is it about the cello that you just are drawn to? What piece?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Goodness. I guess when you're actually playing it, it's all centered around the strings, but they're kind of not the important part because they're the bit you just change occasionally. So I guess it is the body. It's that wooden, shell. It's amazing. It's, my cello's actually, it's pretty old. It's 1765.
1765?
Yeah, it's so old. It was made in London, in Piccadilly in London in 1765.
How did you obtain that?
It was from a cello shop in Ely near Cambridge. And I love that I've read a bit about sort of Mozart's life, and I know that Mozart was in London that year, which is such a lovely thought, isn't it? That you might have walked past the place where it was being made. And then the other thing that I find just fascinating, and this kind of leads up to stuff about my album, is that the wood that was used for my cello was probably, 200-300 years old. So when you think back to when that tree was planted, it's just incredible. And it's incredible because you look at it and it actually doesn't even look that old. It's quite an amazing thing. And the fact it's still there and hasn't, it hasn't been damaged. And yeah,
there's that wonderful movie that was made, 10, 15 years ago. It was called The Red Violin. Yeah. And the history that this violin goes through in terms of different ownership. Let's move into the second part, the second pillar, if you will. This is friendtorship. I'm going to read something to you written by Arthur C. Brooks from the book Build the Life You Want. All the more reason to take honest stock of your friendships. A convenient way to do this comes from none other than the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics. He argued that friendships can be classified along a kind of ladder. At the bottom rung, where people are least connected emotionally, so the commitment is weakest, are the deal friends based on utility to each other in the work or social life. These are your colleagues, partners to a transaction, or simply those who can do each other favors. Higher up are friendships based on pleasure, something you like, admire about the person, such as intelligence, sense of humor. At the highest level of friendships are virtue of what Aristotle calls perfect friendship. These friendships are end in themselves and not instrumental to anything else. Aristotle would say they are complete, pursued for their own sake, and fully realized in the present. What I want to know, Liz, on this ladder of life of friendships, mentors, tell us some people who have supported your vision along the way, and they could be high up on that ladder or down at the bottom rung.
Yeah. Oh, it's really, really interesting to think about and really nice to think about, actually. So I'll start right at the top. So I'll start with my husband, Jack, who who, you know, he just supports me so much. And it's tough being a musician, you know, and going away all the time, and it is hard. And he's incredibly supportive. And actually, I think he's also influenced so much in sort of how I deal with the stresses of it as well. And kind of just, you have to just take a step back and not get so involved to deal with the stress. You know, you have to not think this is the most important thing in my whole entire life. You can never think that about a performance or something you're doing. You have to take everything with a bit of pinch of salt, really, because otherwise it gets too much. So, you know, he's always kind of, you know, good at keeping me grounded, just saying, you know, it'll be all right. Just go and do it and then move on to the next thing. And it's always good advice because, you know, music is music and it's there to be enjoyed. So if you're ever stressed about something, you realize it's not for that. It's there for enjoyment. So no, he's been great at helping me with that and just with everything.
Thank you to Jack. And I will also say you mentioned someone earlier by the name of Mr. Tom.
Oh yeah, Mr. Tom. So he was the man who started me on the cello, and then he taught me up until about the age of 16. And I played a show down in Milton Keynes, and he came along to watch, and I had a lovely chat with him afterwards, and I just said to him, he's such a lovely man and he wouldn't really accept this. I said to him, you changed my life. And he was like, no. I just kind of, you know, gave you a little bit of a lift along the way and helped a little bit, but you know, it wasn't me. I said, no, it really was, because without him, I wouldn't be doing any of these things and all the wonderful experiences I've had. And it just shows how important those teachers are. You know, it's amazing. I'm so lucky that I teach in our local schools. And I feel so lucky to do that. And even if I don't feel like they're going to be a cellist for life, because often, you know, it's quite rare that people do stick with it forever. I think it's all an experience and it's all something you take with you in whatever way you want to. Yeah, so he was wonderful and I've had some wonderful teachers and teachers are such an interesting thing, teaching and what people's take from it. I think I'm always searching for more. And actually, even with colleagues, I'm constantly watching and learning and sort of seeing how everyone does things differently and kind of observing. I've got some incredible colleagues and it's so lovely in music. You know, you end up doing often quite sort of, you end up in sometimes quite stressful situations or in very close quarters, you know, or you say if you're doing a tour. And you can become, you know, best friends with someone even after like an intense day. I feel like you can suddenly have a new best friend because you've been through something together. So I have just like countless people that I just feel like are wonderful that I could actually call upon if I needed them, you know, that I've worked with and learnt from. Yeah, there's too many to mention names, but they know who they are.
Well, I also have to think, and thank you for sharing, by the way, these people that have been in your corner of the ring. I also have to think that you imbue this quality that allows people access to who you are as a person. And I say this with all respect, that I imagine the friendships that you forge with people is very organic. It seems to happen naturally. And you had this disposition stemming all the way back from what you had talked about regarding your childhood. There is a sunny disposition. And this Mr. Tom, Jack, all these people swim towards that. I just think it's part of who you are. You're just there's an environment that you have created from your own being that shoots off these particles of positivity. And it's kind of crazy that you say Mr. Tom, because I had a Mr. Tom that was probably one of my greatest inspirers. And he was my baseball teacher.
Oh, that's amazing.
So yeah, there you go. All these Mr. Tom. Thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. Great. I know. Yeah, it's lovely that you said that about sunny disposition. I have always been quite, you know, a very positive person. I remember there being on my school report, actually, something exactly those words. And I do feel like it has helped with my work, because in music you can end up waiting around a lot. You can end up having to stay up very late or get up very early, or, it can be really hard. It's not always glamorous, and there's a lot of sort of lack of sleep and all kinds of, situations that can be stressful. And I guess my own sort of mantra is just keep on, just be the happy one, be the one that's kind of calm, and just kind of, there's no point, if you're on a tour, for instance, grumbling about being tired. Everyone's tired, just wake up in the morning, say good morning with a smile, everybody. You just have to be that person. And I think that does help with being asked back again for things. If you're the person that doesn't complain and just gets on with stuff, it's really important.
And I think that segues beautifully into the third part of our conversation. And this is the work you do as a cellist, as a musician. This comes from The Artist's Way, written by Julia Cameron. And I want to read something quickly to you, and I would love to know your thoughts.
Okay.
This is about drought. In any creative life, there are dry seasons. These droughts appear from nowhere, and they stretch to the horizon like a Death Valley vista. Life loses its sweetness. Our work feels mechanical, empty, forced. We feel we have nothing to say, and we are tempted to say nothing. These are the times when the morning pages are most difficult to read and most valuable. During a drought, the mere act of showing up on the page, like the act of walking through a trackless desert, requires one footfall after another to no apparent point. Doubts sidle up to us like sidewinders. What's the use? They hiss. What do you expect? Droughts tell us that they will last forever, and that we will not. So what do we do when we hit a drought? What do you do?
So I can see this from different perspectives. So I guess if you're thinking about creatively, it's all pretty new to me, to be honest. So being creative, because the album I've just written, Land, is my first album. So, I'm obviously later in my life, and I just decided to make this album, which I'll talk more about later. But now I guess I'm at the difficult point where I need to make my second album. And I have ideas already. But yeah, I am discovering this sort of drought and this pressure. It's kind of like, oh, I need to do it. So I'm actually working through that at the moment. I think the key is to just keep doing it. And I think that's basically, the good solution. You just have to keep creating and keep on making things and keep on thinking, and never sort of have an idea and think, oh, that's a rubbish idea, I won't even bother with that. Just have a go, because you never know what's going to happen. So that's creatively. And I guess if I think of drought in kind of work terms, that goes back again to, because I'm entirely freelance. I don't have any work that is, salaried or anything. I've always got things on the go. I've always got sort of things I can call on. I do a lot of remote recording at home. So if I feel like, there's not much happening the next few weeks, I can kind of pick up some remote recording work. And I've always got sort of ways of finding some more work. And to be honest, I often get to January and there's not a lot in the diary. That's less so now. I just think, it looks like a very quiet year. And then it just fills up. So yeah, so I don't have to worry about that so much anymore. Yeah, so I guess it's just to keep on working and keep on sort of thinking forwards and don't get stuck worrying about it.
Yeah, and I've heard from many musicians where they do get stuck. They get stuck because they feel as though at that point they have nothing to offer. But sometimes we don't need to offer to other people. We can just do it for ourselves, and the creation that comes from that, the product. So when you say just keep doing it, does that mean every day you're working on something, whether it gets really recorded? You put the time in?
It depends. You mean working on my own music? It just depends. It It's funny, I think back to when I made my album, and to be honest, it's all a bit of a blur because a lot of it was during the pandemic, which was all a bit of a blur. And some of it was afterwards, when we'd all been let out again. But I can't remember there isn't much structure going on. I have a family, so it's not like I'm going to sit in my studio at 9 a.m. every morning and work on stuff. It just comes when I grab the chance. And actually, I find that having a family and having, in a way, a lot less time than I would have done previously means that you do grab those moments because they're the only moments you have. And that's not a bad thing, I don't think. I think if I had 9 to 5 in my studio every day, I would not do very well at that.
Yeah. 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 And so let's now get into your album Land, released June 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from a vision standpoint, thematically, you're talking about kind of looking at the natural world and using these pieces to show reflection, to show introspection, to promote and to evoke ideas that tap into that. Is that what you were going for?
That's right. It's actually all about my local area here in Sheffield. It's called Mearsbrook. And as I said before, Sheffield is pretty hilly. It's built on 7 hills like Rome. So we are sort of pretty much on the edge of a hillside here. And it's now covered in, if you imagine the Victorian terraced housing. So we've got a lot of terraced houses and roads and, all the infrastructure's there now. So I the reason why I made this album was really to evoke this image of what this land was like before all the houses and the roads were there. Because actually from my house here, it's like being in a valley. We are in a valley. So it goes down a hill and you can see this road going all the way up the other side. And the valley used to be called Rushdale. And it's, this isn't a particularly sort of special place that there's been lots of sort of oil paintings done and lots of history about it. But there was small amounts of information. And apparently it was a beautiful valley with mature oaks and a babbling brook at the bottom and an amazing bird life. And of course now it's part of a city. So I just find it fascinating that you can still see the lie of the land and you can imagine what this used to be like. And that is what the album, in essence, is about. It's about sort of taking you back in time almost to imagine this place.
And that is one of the reasons why I love this album, because I could close my eyes and no matter where I am, although I have not been to where you are specifically talking about, I can appreciate those images being conjured up, and it slows my breath down. It slows down time. And in this busy, chaotic world that sometimes we fall into, it's a wonderful album of meditation. If I were still teaching young kids, elementary school children, I would be using this album time and time again. And here's how: journal writing. Oh my goodness, where I taught, it was called Portola Valley. Beautiful landscape all around our classroom setting. 2, I would use it whilst reading books, I loved using music to accompany it while I was reading. I got very theatrical. And 3, I did a lot of meditative kid-like yoga in the mornings. And so this music would be a great way to pause and to hear our breath. So it's one of those albums I feel like everything that you just talked about and then some can be used in so many ways. And it never feels to me maudlin. It never feels oversaccharized. It just has so many wonderful tones to it. In fact, can we hear a song called Brook? We're going to take a listen to a song from the album Land by Liz Hanks called Brook, and she's going to give us some backstory to it. Here we go. So now, after hearing that song, Liz, what are your thoughts on that?
But it's always lovely listening. It's interesting to sort of think back about creating these pieces. So Brook itself is about that babbling brook at the bottom of the valley that I mentioned earlier. And the brook, it actually has an amazing history. So at the moment, it's a boundary between two areas of Hawley and Meersbrook. And it used to be the boundary between the counties of Yorkshire and Derbyshire. But then going back a lot further, so, like 1,000 years or more, it was the boundary between Mercia and Northumbria. Now, these are ancient kingdoms. And it's just fascinating that there's this incredible place. And you would not know now because a lot of it is actually underground. It's been culverted in a pipe. So a lot of the brook is now under the roads and under the houses. But you can still see it in our local woodland. But I think a lot of people that live here just don't know that it's got this incredible history. And I see people walking over it each day, on their way to work or to school or to walk the dog, and just crossing this amazing place. And I think it's good just to remember history like this. I actually hated history when I was at school. So it's kind of interesting that I'm so into it now. But there's just something for me with combining music and history. It's like making something, conjuring something up. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to tell a story about a particular person. It can just be about a place and about, that place. And it's pretty simple. And I really like that idea of sort of conjuring up the past. That's right. There's all field recordings done around this area. So they're all sounds from around here. There's some bird song. There's some sounds of water. And actually there's one track called Mia that has the sound of hail. We were really lucky when we were recording just on a steep bank in the woods. It just started to hail, and it hailed for quite a long time, which is quite unusual. And we just recorded the whole thing. It was amazing. And then we actually had a dog walker walk by, which I also used at the end of the track. So it was a special moment.
Well, yes. And if I'm not mistaken, whilst the tune is playing, you still hear the natural world. Yeah, see these little nuggets of gold.
Yeah, totally.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. All right, let's talk about, actually, before we do, let's listen to the song Hide from the album Land by Liz Hanks. All right, give us a little backstory to this one.
Okay, so the way this one actually started was with a kind of made-up folk tune, I guess. So folk music is relatively new to me. I was really lucky to collaborate with a neighbour of mine, Michael Walsh, who's an amazing flute player, Irish flute. And so we did some lovely stuff together, and I played on his album, Quairhawk. And then it was actually Mike who encouraged me to sort of do more in the folk world, because I always felt like, I'm not from a folk family. I have no folk background. But he was just, he was just like, go for it. If you like it, you are in the folk world. And I've discovered that actually the folk world is so incredibly welcoming. There are aspects of it that I can't go to a session and play along. I don't know all the folk tunes. It's not in my blood. I haven't, done it for years and years. I think if I spent a lot of time on it, I could do it. But I just love folk music, and I love the history and the way sessions happen and musicians just play. And so from working with Mike, I actually also met Martin Simpson. I think that was the way it worked. I remember Mike already knew Martin. So I've been really lucky to love folk music and then end up sort of going straight in and playing with some amazing, amazing folk musicians, which has just been amazing. So learning sort of more and feeling more confident from friends just encouraging me. I thought, all right, I'm going to write this little folk tune and put some harmony to it. And then the second half of Hyde is just a little improvisation, I guess. And it was just to kind of create space, that the second half, which you'll hear, is kind of quite spacious. And the piece is actually, the title is an old English word, and it means a measurement of land needed to sustain a family. So this is quite an amazing thing, because obviously we don't use this word anymore, because we don't need to do that anymore. We have supermarkets and shops that we go to. But, people used to just be so dependent on land and growing their own food. And that was for survival. This was so incredibly important. The soil was to, keep them alive. And I just feel like we have completely lost our connection to that when we can just go and pick up whatever we need. And I guess it's just really important to keep that in our minds, that the soil and the earth is so important. And it still is, we still depend on it, even though we're disconnected from it.
So you said something in describing that song and your relationship to it that I'm glad you said, because one of the first things I absorbed whilst hearing that song was that middle part where it takes you on another side path, and there's calm and still, and you allow the space in between. I don't know the terminology, the notes, if you will.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I feel like I know I've spoken to some artists. That's not easy to do, because sometimes it's this desire to really chop things up quickly, splice them together, and not allow that uncorkage and let it breathe. And I feel like in that song, we can breathe.
Well, that's lovely to hear. Thank you. I think with the whole album, I decided from the very start that I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. I really like simple music. I really like, my favorite things are either a solo piano or a solo cello. I really like sort of minimal. And that was my challenge, was what can I make with just a cello and some sounds? And, and that is all the whole album is that. So I really enjoy seeing how little I can use to make something work. And often the way I write is, I'll make a track and then I'll add a load of things, just kind of improvise over the top. And then usually I take about 90% of what I've done out again and just leave the little nuggets of things that I think actually that really works. I'm just going to leave that.
Okay. So there's a gentleman I'm going to read to you a little bit later. His name is Rick Rubin, famous music producer, Beastie Boys, Johnny Cash, Tom Petty, the list goes on and on and on. And he talks about, how do you know when a song is done? And he says, when you feel it. Does that apply to you?
Yeah, I guess so. There's always compromises. I feel now when I listen back, I thought I could have done that bit again, or I could. But actually, I'm also quite happy to let things go and to let them just be what they are. And if there is something that to me can sound a bit like a mistake in some ways, I'm just like, well, actually, it's not really a mistake. It's just a moment in time. And I quite like it, so I'm going to leave it. So I also enjoyed not having to be perfect on this album. So, a lot of learning, I only learned classical music up until the age of 18, I've still, play classical music, and it's always been a part of my life, but it was always focused on classical music. And I think from then on, I've been discovering other ways of playing, other genres, other ways of, realizing that perfect is good, but actually nothing's ever perfect. And that's okay. And it's all right to have imperfections, and it's all right just enjoy whatever happens, as that kind of, in terms of improvisation as well. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful.
And see, there's that half full outlook. There's that sunny disposition. There's that air of positivity. It keeps weaving itself into this conversation. You toured for this album. You did some shows. Is that correct?
Yeah, still doing it actually. Yeah. I just played in Bath the weekend. Beautiful place. It was absolutely amazing. And
I saw a performance where you had some visual background.
Oh, yeah, it was at the Samuel Worth Chapel in Sheffield. It's actually in our general cemetery. It's like an old cemetery, so it's actually a beautiful place. It's obviously covered in gravestones, but it's got amazing trees, and it's a beautiful place. So you have to walk through the cemetery to get to the Samuel Worth Chapel. So it's quite an experience for the people that came to watch. But we projected the film, which is all sort of drone footage from around this area. So you get to see, it was really beautiful. Yeah. Really lovely night.
Do you really enjoy performing?
I do. And I'm realizing when I perform my own music, I enjoy performing with everybody, but there's something really freeing about playing my own music because it's mine. And if something does, go a little bit wrong, or I can just make it up a bit or change it a bit, or, some elements of it are improvised anyway. So it's a really nice way to present the music and I'm really enjoying doing it live. Yeah. I've got a few more shows to come up as well.
We're going to move out of our pillars of conversation. We discussed family, friendship, and your work. I want to get to the encore, if you will, of our conversation. And I want to know, so you had mentioned you really like the minimalist style, leaving space. There's a gentleman that I have come to really grow and appreciate and really respect his music. His music got me through some really, really challenging times in my life, including the loss of my father. And there's an album that he wrote called True Love's Gutter that is probably a very close friend of mine in terms of music, a life preserver, if you will. So I'm talking about Richard Hawley. And I want to know and tell the listeners, Liz, you have done some work with Richard. What was that experience like? And what did you gain from working with him, collaborating?
Well, I've actually known Richard for a very long time now because I got to know him, when I told you about that Long Pig session. That was the first time I'd met him. But then we obviously had mutual friends, and I was kind of getting into the band scene in Sheffield. And I remember I played in a band called the Justin Lewis Orchestra, and we had the same manager at the time. But actually before that, I remember being sat in a mutual friend's house and just in the kitchen. It was quite late, and I think a lot of people had left. And I remember just being sat in the kitchen with Richard and him just saying to me, I've got these solo songs. I'm thinking about doing a solo thing. Can I just play them to you? So he just sat there and played guitar to me and sang. I know, it was pretty amazing. Yeah, so that was a very long time ago. And then in 2001, I believe, I recorded on his first album. And then actually, very proud of this, I've played on every single album that has had strings since then. So I think there's only a couple that haven't. And yeah, I've played on every single one of them, which is quite an amazing thing. And his music for me now is very special. It's kind of been the soundtrack to my life in Sheffield. So every time I hear it, it takes me back to a time. And and I know all the band very well and Richard. And so it's special. It's like a little, like a little family. It's lovely.
Okay, so let's go a little step further. Now, I've only seen live performances on YouTube. Obviously, I hear it on the albums. Him coming to the States, very infrequent. What is it about that family you just mentioned works so well. They all seem to be so confident in what they do as musicians, and then they come together and magic happens.
I know.
Why and how? What is it? Give us a little insight.
I guess they're just all amazing. And I love the fact that, you know, they're all Sheffielders, apart from Dean, the drummer, but he's like an honorary Sheffielder now. They're just all incredible musicians. And I think the fact they're all very humble and just lovely. And yeah, I don't know. There's something magic going on there, though. Definitely. And the studio that Richard always records at, Yellow Arch Studio, and Colin Elliott's the producer. There's definitely some magic in the air for sure.
Okay. We know he has a new album coming out, In This City They Call You Love.
Yeah.
What was your role on that one?
So I just played on some of the strings. So I mentioned earlier about sort of, you know, making things happen, and about, I don't know how long it was now, probably 8 or 9 years ago, I set up the Up North Session Orchestra. So this is really for fixing players for sessions. So basically, back in the day, it used to just be me and a few mates would just kind of turn up, and it was all a bit kind of haphazard. But now we're a bit more organised now, so we know what we're doing. I run it with a colleague, Natalie Purton, who's in Manchester. And so playing on Richard's album now, it's, you know, that was a string session. So we had players that we brought along, and then we go along to the studio at Yellow Arch, and Colin Elliott does the string arrangements. And yeah, so that's how that works. Yeah.
Now, I have not heard the album. It comes out in the end of May. I've heard some songs. Is the string orchestra on the entire thing, or just select?
No, only on select songs.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Fantastic. So I imagine we're in for a special treat.
Oh, it's going to be amazing for sure.
Lovely. Now, you've also collaborated with some other amazing musicians. Any experiences you want to talk about?
Yeah. Goodness, where do I start? So, well, I guess, James. So James has been lovely. And for me, it was, it's more, I'm just playing in an orchestra with James, you know, it's been an absolute pleasure, because this was my youth, you know, this was my sort of teenage years. You know, I remember Sit Down being played in clubs and we all sat on the floor. So it was lovely to meet them all and to play with them. And that's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah. Yeah, there was like an orchestral album, so there was a lot of us playing on that, and then we did some live shows as well. So yeah, it was really lovely. Yeah, it's been great.
That orchestral album is a must own.
Oh, I'm glad you like it.
Those wonderful renditions, and the fact that the band brought out some deep cuts, fantastic. Liam Gallagher?
Yeah, so I actually toured with Liam Gallagher for probably about 2 years in the end. I know, I'm so lucky. So it was really interesting. So they basically needed a cellist to come and play Wonderwall. So when we were playing live, I just came on and played the sort of cello line. But then it kind of grew, and I ended up playing on more songs, and I played on Live Forever, for instance. And it was just so wonderful, because I'd just come on at the end, you know, near the end of the show. It was like an encore, and it would just be acoustic guitar, Liam singing, and me on cello in front of a lot of people. And it was just always an absolute pleasure, and wonderful to tour with them all. An amazing band, and took us all over the place, and it was incredible. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question, but I'm going to anyways. What makes Liam's work, or him as a musician, so special?
Again, I don't know. It's just kind of, yeah, it's, who knows? But for me, it was very special, because again, these songs were my youth. I remember my brother, sort of when I went off to university, his parting gift was an Oasis album. He's like, take this with you.
Any other experiences you'd like to share before we move on?
To do all of that, it was brilliant. So I guess with my kind of creative work, so it's kind of in lots of different pockets, I guess, all my work. So I've got the session orchestra, and I've got my album, and I do the remote recording. But then I also have like this sort of creative work side, where I sort of, collaborate with other musicians, say sort of in the folk world, I mentioned Martin Simpson. So I'll go along and I'll sort of make my own parts up and play on his albums, and playing with him live as well sometimes, which is amazing. And then I've recently done that for Martin Joseph. I've just been playing on some of on his latest album, and that was an absolute pleasure. But you mentioned earlier about the Indian classical music, and I've been so lucky. I've been kind of like taken in by the amazing SAR UK and to work on some projects, and I've just loved it. There's something about Indian music that just really, I just find it incredible. And I actually travelled in India a little bit quite a long time ago now, but for me it's just so special, and meeting incredible musicians. I've worked with Jasdeep Singh Degun, incredible sitar player. If you haven't heard, he's going to be on my list of albums. If you haven't heard his album's called Anomaly, and he's amazing. And I've just recently been working with Divya Ravi, who's an incredible dancer, and again with some amazing musicians, and I just feel incredibly lucky. And for me, as a collaborator, I just learn so much from being around people and just sensing the vibes and sensing the music, and it's just magical and wonderful. And I don't even begin to say that I can actually play Indian classical music, but I can join in some way and add my own thing. So yeah, it's just wonderful. It's just to be involved in that world is just so special, an absolute treat.
See, again, of course, you're adept at this amazing skill that you're able to offer to people and contribute. But again, I'm reminded there's no ego to you,
Right.
which again sets up an environment where people go, yes, I want to work with her because of what we just talked about. And I imagine they're learning from you just as much as you're learning from them in that experience. So that's fantastic. So speaking of albums, are there some albums you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, so the first one I'm going to recommend is a very new album, and it's one I've played on as well. So it's with Martin Simpson's album, and it's Sky Dancers. I just love Martin's playing. So I've always loved that kind of male English folk song voice. Sometimes he does other styles, which I equally love, but there's something about that very sort of pure sound. And obviously his guitar playing is phenomenal, and it's always a pleasure. So do check out that album. The second one is another folk inspired one. It's a fiddle player called Laura McCall, and she's on the same record label as me, Hudson Records. And the album's called Landskeen. I think it's Skeen. I'm not sure how you say it, Landskeen. And I just love it. There's a simplicity about it. It was recorded in a village hall, I believe, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And I do have another one, and that was the one I mentioned earlier, to Jasdeep Singh Degun. He's a sitarist, and his album's called Anomaly. I played on that one as well. So... And he's just absolutely brilliant. It's signed to Real World Records, and he's just doing wonderful things. So check out Jasdeep's work. Yeah. Oh, could I have one more? So this is one I didn't play on, but I am doing the tour with them. So this is Cara Dillon. So I've been touring with Cara Dillon, and I'm about to do more touring with her in the autumn. And playing with Cara has been an absolute pleasure. She's incredible. And this album's called Coming Home, and it's all about sort of her growing up in Ireland and all about family. And it's just incredible. And if you can make it to a show, the stories that go with the tracks, the songs are just incredible. So please come along if you can. She's touring again in October, I believe, but check out her website for dates.
All good stuff. From a teacher to a teacher, I have some homework to do, so thank you. Okay, let's do lightning round. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay, so I'm just going to rattle off. You just rattle off what comes to mind. No right or wrong answer. Just do the best you can. If we get to one and you just can't think of anything, just say pass.
Okie doke.
Okay, here we go. What comes to mind when you hear the word Sheffield? What comes to mind when you hear the word Sheffield?
Green.
San Francisco.
Hills.
An instrument you would love to learn how to play.
The musical saw.
Beyonce or Taylor Swift?
I'm just going to say Taylor Swift because that seems like the one of the moment.
Thai food or sushi?
Sushi.
The last book that you read that walloped you, had a real impact.
Oh, Cara Dillon's Coming Home. There's a book that goes with the album. It's brilliant.
Can't wait to get my hands on that one. Kate Winslet.
I really rubbish at this. Kate Winslet. Oh, Titanic.
A place that you'd like to travel to.
I'd like to go back to India.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Something that you feel is underrated.
Doing less.
Yo-Yo Ma, Pablo Casals.
I'm going to go Yo-Yo Ma.
Who is Liz Hanks?
Just me.
Fair enough. Just you. Keep being you.
Okay.
What's coming down the line for you in 2024 and beyond? What can the listeners expect?
So I'm starting work on my new album. So there's something coming from there. And I'm not going to give too much away, but it's to do with water in some way. So there's that coming. And I'm doing the tour with Cara that I mentioned, Cara Dillon tour. So it's an absolute pleasure to play with her. I'm also doing some more shows with Land. So I'm playing at Timber Festival in July on the stage that's been curated by the wonderful Jason Singh. If you don't know Jason Singh, definitely check out his stuff. He's an incredible producer, beatboxer. He's just amazing, incredible musician. And again, his music's often connected with the land and with nature. So do check him out. And then I'm also playing at Martin Joseph's Pipe Fest in September, which is going to be amazing. Yeah. So lots of nice things coming up.
Thank you, Liz. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I love this fact that you deliver your choice of words with there's space. There is a harmony. There is the way that you communicate and express your energy and your love for music, your craft. It all makes sense to me, even though I'm not a cellist. And that's kind of what I wanted to walk away from. Like, sure, I learned a little bit more about being a cellist, but more so understanding what makes you tick. And there's great beauty and resonance in there. And I think this last passage will underscore some of that. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, William. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome, and much continued success in all the endeavors that you're going on, the Odyssey and Journeys, and congratulations on the Land album. And all listeners tuning in, check it out. Go to Bandcamp, Spotify, you name it. It's all there. I'm going to wrap this up, as they say in England, full stop. And this comes from a book called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. But this time, Liz, no response, just listen.
Great.
Rick Rubin says, all living things are interconnected, depending on one another to survive. A work of art is no different. It generates excitement in you. This commands your attention, and your attention is exactly what's required for it to grow. It's a harmonic, mutually dependent relationship. The creator and the creation rely on each other to thrive. The call of the artist is to follow the excitement within. Where there's excitement, there's energy. And where there is energy, there is light. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is W, host of the High Art on the Edge page, host of Surprise Cast. Again, this has been a very intimate conversation with Liz Hanks. Remember, great music is always out there. You just have to keep your ears open. Ciao.